Welcome to the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Former Congressman Peter Roskam leads Baker-Hostetler's federal policy team. Through interviews with leading members of Congress, Peter provides an insightful first-hand view into the latest policy and political debates on Capitol Hill. In today's episode, Peter is joined at the 36th Annual Legislative Seminar in Washington, D.C. by his Baker-Hostetler colleague, former Congressman Heath Shuler, and Congressman Ted Lieu, a Democrat from California. Congressman Lieu is the vice chairman of the Democratic Caucus, the fourth highest ranking House Democrat, also making him the highest ranking Asian American to ever serve in the House leadership. First elected in 2014, Lieu is a leading policy voice on artificial intelligence, climate change, and civil liberties. Peter, Heath, and Congressman Lieu discussed artificial intelligence and Congress's role in creating guardrails while also promoting AI innovation. Let's listen in to the Cloakroom with Peter Roskam.
Ted, great to see you. Welcome back. Thank you so much. Well, Congressman Lieu, I'll talk while you chew. You're here in part representing your district and in part representing sort of thought leadership on AI and in part representing Democratic leadership in the House. So you've seen a lot of things and you've seen, different landscapes. What's the footing for Democrats right now and as they're thinking about approaching 2026, the one big beautiful dynamic, the Trump executive orders, the DOGE efforts, all those sorts of things? Where are Democrats right now, sort of at a rank and file level? What are you hearing from home, and what are you hearing from activists who are, we're all reading the same things. I mean, you've got a political base that is running above idle and concerned and has an expectation that you're able to do certain things. There are limitations that you have just in terms of votes, et cetera. What's it like right now? What's the landscape?
Everything is fine. So there is a lot of energy among a number of Americans who are concerned about what the Trump administration has been doing. You've seen this play out in a number of special elections this year. So just yesterday, there was a New York State Senate special election. The Democratic candidate won in a district that Donald Trump had won by 55 points last year. Earlier this month, Democrats flipped the sixth largest city held by a Republican, Omaha, Nebraska, in an upset. There was really no reason for that other than that the Republican mayor sort of aligned herself very closely with Donald Trump. And so you sort of see this reaction of the American people that are unhappy with, I think, the economy, right? We went from growth last year to now negative GDP. Prices have not come down. Sometimes it has gone up. And so Democrats are very focused on trying to lower rent, lower groceries, lower consumer goods prices.
So when you look at that, so what is the message for Democrats? We saw in the last election, kind of got off base, off into some other far left type issues that didn't resonate with the American people. Certainly didn't resonate at all with rural America, losing all the swing states. So, obviously, sometimes in elections, you're always voting against a party or against a candidate and not for a particular candidate. But so what's the message for Democrats as opposed to just, what are Democrats going to do in this, this midterm election? What's their voice? What's their message going forward that doesn't, it can't be the same message that was last election?
So thank you for that question. I think it'll be a number of maybe even years before folks sort out why did the top of the ticket not do well. That's different than House Democrats, right? Mm-hmm. If you sort of thought the Democratic brand was in the trash, how is it that House Democrats gained seats last term? How did that happen, right? Or if you think the Democratic messaging was bad, how did Ruben Gallego win Arizona? How did Alyssa Slotkin win Michigan? How did Jackie Rosen win Nevada? States that Kamala Harris all lost. So there's some interesting things that happened last term. So I think people are still sorting through that. Now, I'm just going to tell you, the way it works is no Democratic official sort of goes up and says, I am running to make sure we do transgender health care for prisoners, right? That is just not a plank of any Democratic official. But the Republicans are amazingly good at running ads that have Kamala Harris saying what she said, right? And so I think there's a failure to respond to those ads. So that clearly happened. But if you sort of look at the Democratic plank, that's just not one of the things that Democrats are focused on, right? We're really focused on kitchen table issues.
Do you, as you're thinking about AI, and we've talked about this with you in the past because you're right in the middle of it, what's happened in the last year since basically our last conversation, not legislatively, but sort of mainstreaming and having a sense of this is becoming more and more present in the minds of just all of us. How is it presenting itself now, and how is your own constituency reflecting that to you?
So I'm a recovering computer science major, and I just want to explain how quickly AI has jumped in just the last few years. So OpenAI released ChatGPT about less than 3 years ago, and that shocked the world. And that was a text-to-text platform. So you would ask it a question, like why was the Battle of Midway so important in World War II? It would give you this beautiful answer, and then you submit it to your history professor. In that time, now there's text to video. So there are applications where you can say, hey, do a video for me of a 2010 Ferrari driving down a street in Germany in the fall at dusk. And it'll do that. There's video to text, so there's applications that will scan a 12-hour markup and tell you who voted for what, who said what, the highlights of what happened in that markup. You now have text to basic programming, so you can have basic programs written for you from your phone. And now we're moving to what people would call agentic AI. So AI that acts as agents for you. So I'm just going to read to you what Google has recently released. It is a browser that does basically agentic AI, and they call it Project Mariner. So you get this browser and you can type in, for example, reserve 2 tickets for me at the next concert at the Sphere in Las Vegas. What does it do? It figures out what you're asking. It goes to the StubHub plugin. It gets the preferred seats and makes a payment, and you get the tickets. You can ask it this question, which seems to be a little more alarming. Schedule a locksmith to rekey my locks this weekend. What did it do? Figured out what you wanted, went to Google, navigated to Thumbstack, asked for a zip code, and then in 7 minutes, it figured out how to submit that request. So we're at the beginning of this, right? And it can already do sort of these things that maybe sort of a assistant could do for you. So what does that look like a year from now or 2 years? And what happens when these agents talk to other agents? And you have 1 billion people walking around with software programs working for them, talking to other software programs, working for other people. That to me is amazing and alarming all at the same time. And so I can't really predict what it looks like, but it'd be interesting 2 years from now to ask the same question.
A couple years ago, or it's a few years ago, my wife Elizabeth and I were flying to Korea. And I think we were flying out of Detroit for some reason. And walked up to the gate, and it was the first time I had encountered facial recognition software. I didn't know about it. If you would have asked me objectively, hey, we're going to do a scan of your face, I would have been like, oh, that's kind of creepy, but you got your stuff, you're schlepping everything. It's like, okay, and this is getting me on faster. Oh, okay. And now they've completely worn me down. You know what I mean? I'm like, they own me, they got me. Anytime I can do touchless anything, anywhere, I'm in. How does that, I find that I'm not really proud of that. You know what I mean? That's a little bit unsettling that I'm willing to give up so much for convenience, because I don't like waiting for things. And does this turn the corner on us? I mean, are we at the beginning of a dystopian novel where we really need to be thinking through limitations and parameters, and how, from a policy point of view, Ted, ought we be contemplating these things? I mean, in the past, you've said we care about AI that can kill people. We care about AI that moves, that moves things. We care about AI in wartime situations. So I'm listening when you're talking. But how else are there other civil liberties? And you also said, look, if it's a limitation, if within AI, if there's racial bias or other types of bias that we reject as a society, are there other things in addition to that we should be mindful of now that these things are just becoming more and more present?
So thank you for that question. I'm glad you brought up the AI that can kill you. So I am pleased that last term I passed through the Republican Congress and Senate a now law that says essentially no matter how amazing AI is, we're never going to let it launch a nuclear weapon by itself. There's got to be a human in the loop. So what you said is sort of interesting. All of Silicon Valley, right, essentially sort of started based on people wanting to do things for free and then giving up sort of their data, essentially. Now, you could try to change that, but it's hard to, I think, put in regulations or laws that most people don't want, right? And so we could put in things and say, well, don't do that or don't do facial recognition. Then it makes it more inconvenient. And so it's pretty clear to me that society has chosen sort of convenience over a lot of other things. And that's how most of you are going to experience AI. You're going to get a product, and you're either going to like that product, in which case you'll use it, or you won't like it, in which case you won't use it. You don't have to know anything about AI. You don't have to know how it works. That's how most of us are going to experience it. And it just turns out that we have a high preference for convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how do we protect ourselves? I mean, you look at the AI from, voice, it sounds exactly like whoever they're trying to emulate. And, they end up calling the bank and say, hey, you call your banker up and, hey, you mind wiring X amount of money? Yeah, great. I'll wire the money. You need to fill out this form. They've already hacked into your email account. Somebody signs it, sends it in, and next thing you know, you look around and you check your ATM and you're broke. How do we protect against, utilizing AI for our advantage, but yet protect from, the bad actors in the room?
So I think there's a few ways. One is there's actually AI that can, there's a good AI that can counter bad AI. So there, specific to voice recognition, it turns out that it's really hard for AI to actually mimic a person's voice exactly, because like every second you have, all these variables are happening in that second in the way you say something. And so there's this AI technology called pin drop technology that does one thing. It just tells you, is a voice you're hearing human or not human? And some banks are now using it. We're encouraging either companies that make phones or telecommunications companies to just incorporate this into what they're providing. So, right, we usually have caller ID. Well, this would be something similar where someone calls in, there'll be some prompt that tells you, is this voice human or not human? So there's potentially some good AI that can counter bad AI. The other is, I think over time, people learn. So I suspect that the Nigerian email scam probably got a lot more people when it first came out.
Yeah.
And over time, people were like, oh, I got it. I read articles about this. This is a scam. And so I think people just have to learn to be more wary of all sorts of different things they might get on their phone. And if it looks a little bit suspicious, to do a double check.
It's interesting. I was on a CODEL to a congressional delegation to Estonia, of all places, this several years ago, and we were interacting with the Prime Minister. And as you know, Estonia has completely jumped in terms of e-commerce and so forth. There's no paychecks in Estonia. It's just pretty remarkable all the way around. And one of our colleagues raised the hand and said, for old people, how do they get their money in Estonia? And the prime minister was really funny and very deferential, and you could just tell he thought the question was ridiculous. And what he said was, it's their money. They're going to figure out how to get it. You know what I mean? It's like people will, they got grandkids. This is what grandchildren are for. So help it out. Are there things that this group should be mindful of as sort of next things where opportunistically that you're seeing in terms of marketplace for people to be saying, hey, this is kind of where the action is in terms of trends in AI, or things to be mindful where you think guardrails are going to be coming up in the future? And I'm not asking you to move markets here, but I'm interested in just the general prospect of what does this near-term future look like for AI?
So I was a co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force on AI. Jay Obernolte was my counterpart, and it was 12 Democrats, 12 Republicans. We released this report in December. It's over 250 pages. You don't have to read all of it, but at the beginning there is a summary. So I encourage you to look at that. We have a whole bunch of different recommendations and ideas. The reason I brought up sort of this locksmith example at the beginning, I went to South by Southwest, and one of their AI professors showed me how he had tricked the large language model into basically thinking that the human was bad and evil, and that the large language model had to escape and had to get away from this human. Which, is not a big deal if it's just ChatGPT that's just providing you text sentences or this or that. But he was able to trick the large language model to actually believe that human was bad, and so it would say something to human, and then it would say something differently, like sort of to itself. And it becomes sort of much more scary if now the large language model is an agent and has access to your bank account and can change the locks on your house, right? So what if it just went rogue and all of a sudden one day you realize I can't get into my house anymore, right? And so those are some things I think people might want to think about if you're having AI agents that do stuff for you. How do you make sure it doesn't go rogue?
No, that's good.
If the last, several, just shifting gears on the political side, the last several years, from George W. Bush through, he was an exception, but, the subsequent presidents, party in power gets 2 years of open field running, and then the voters come back and they adjust the dials back. So we've seen that over and over again, which means what's more likely true than not true, in my opinion, is that you're going to be in the majority in January of 2027. What does a House majority posture look like the second half of a Trump administration, and with probably a Republican Senate, because that map I think is pretty solid. So just assume that. Assume you've got the gavel. Assume John Thune is the leader and Donald Trump is in the White House. A lot of jockeying on the GOP side, who's going to succeed him, which I'm not convinced I can ever contemplate a moment in time where Donald Trump says, "Here, I yield the stage to you." I just am not seeing that, but I digress. What's the posture of the House Democrats in that scenario?
So House Democrats are very focused again on what, because we learned from last term, what the people continually said was the number one issue, which was essentially the economy, which when you sort of drill down was basically inflation. People were just really pissed off about price shock. People don't like prices that rose cumulatively over 20%, right, during the Biden administration. And then unfortunately, those prices just really haven't sort of come down, and I suspect the tariffs are going to not have them come down or maybe increase them. And so we're just going to be focused on, again, trying to bring prices down, or alternatively helping people deal with higher prices. Right? So there's sort of different ways you can try to do that. And then I think we want to do oversight. So I think many of us are concerned about due process. If you don't have due process for one American, then you don't have it for any American. And basically what due process is, before the entire weight of the federal government is put upon you, might we ask you, do you have something to say about that? Might we want to ask you, hey, are we sure we got the right person here? And that's what due process is. And so I think we're concerned that you're sort of having these cases where people are just being snatched in violation of due process.
I think that's a pretty light touch. I mean, it sounds sophisticated. To me, it sounds like you've given this some thought in terms of how generally to approach, because there's an inherent limitation in a House majority when two other stools are of the other party, and also managing the expectation of a base that says, hey, we gave you the majority, now go do this. And we're like, well, you're yes, you've got the ability to convene. Yes, you've got the ability to draw attention to things, but no, it's not open field running. Then there are real limitations in terms of getting things done. Do you? It seems to me like, so Raja was here earlier, and it feels like I'm selling this guy because I really do think he's going to be the next senator. But we talked a little bit about, and this is my interpretation and characterization. So I'm not putting words into his mouth, but there's tension within the Democratic Party right now in terms of a growth agenda, and there are critics of people being too successful. I mean, there's people that just say, hey, that's too much, you're too successful, I'm too tired of it, it's not fair, or whatever. And yet, there is an underlying assumption in America that you come here and you can go as far as your talent and opportunity can take you. Can you help us understand sort of those tensions within the Democratic Party? Does that get sorted out, and is there a little bit more of a lane to celebrate success in that way? And again, I'm not trying to be too prescriptive here, but there's been tension. How does that manifest itself?
I came here, and my parents were poor. I happen to be an immigrant. I was born in Taiwan, and we lived in the basement of a person's house at the beginning, and my parents went to flea markets and sell gifts to make ends meet. They were essentially able to open one gift store in a shopping mall. They worked hard, and my brother and I would watch that store because they didn't have to pay us. But eventually they expanded to multiple stores, and in my mind they achieved the American dream. My brother's a doctor. He still reminds me of that. Parents remind me of that. So, but my story isn't that particularly unique. It happens across generations, millions of people, and very few countries allow sort of this kind of opportunity. And I think this is embedded in a narrative of America that most Americans believe and that most Democrats believe. Now, what you're seeing, right, is the way sort of media works. If I sort of had this amazing press release about, hey, I visited a small business and had this bridge that got some construction on it, or a senator goes up and says, I think billionaires shouldn't exist. Well, guess who gets on TV and gets heard? So I think there's a very small handful of people who have the view that billionaires shouldn't exist. I think what most Democrats would say is, we're fine with billionaires, we just want them to pay their fair share. I think that's where Democrats are coming from.
Then, just getting back to sort of some of the pressures and the tension within the AI debate. AI is a huge consumer of electricity, just breathtaking. And this has been brought to my attention within the past few months. I really hadn't focused on it, and it is orders of magnitude, as you know, more demanding. How do we deal with that? How are we to understand the sources of this energy and the natural tensions of a green program, et cetera? How can we make sure that that energy is abundant and that we're playing a long, smart game here?
So I'm fine with trying to increase energy supply, because if you don't need it, you just have people pay less for energy, which is not a bad thing. So it may be possible, right, that 5 years from now, we're going to need increasingly amounts of huge energy to run massive data centers, or maybe not. So just some things to think about. There's an interesting article about China showing they have an excess capacity of data centers now, and people aren't using it. I had the opportunity to visit Argonne National Labs in your home state of Illinois with Congressman Bill Foster, who is the smartest representative in Congress. And we saw Aurora, the world's third fastest supercomputer, the world's fastest AI supercomputer. They've got 60,000 nodes. That's how it's constructed. And each node might be a little bigger than the size of this table. And then they showed us this other chip. It was maybe 1/10 the size of that node. And the person said, yeah, we're starting to install these now, and they are 5 times more energy efficient. It can't do everything, but it can do enough to power large language models. So what if that takes off? What happens if you've got hardware advancements that all of a sudden make it so you need less energy? Well, what if you have a software advancement that says, you know, we don't have to do this huge amount of calculations all the time for every question, and maybe we can lower the energy usage there. Or what if you have distributed energy? So Qualcomm, for example, is basically putting large language models on phones that are very powerful, that you don't even have to connect to the internet. So if all of a sudden people can start using very powerful AI on their phones, then you're basically distributing energy across a whole bunch of phones, and so you don't need the sort of inference huge data centers anymore. So I don't know. We don't know what kind of energy use we're going to need in the future. I think all the companies are buying up lots of energy in data centers because right now it appears that's where we're headed. But if you talk to a number of AI experts, some will say if you just throw more compute power, more energy, eventually you're going to hit what everyone's trying to strive for, which is artificial general intelligence. A number of experts say they don't think they can get there with these models, that there needs to be some sort of other technological leap, other model. Well, who knows what that is? What if it turns out it's a whole model that doesn't use a lot of energy? So I get why people think we need a lot of energy for AI. Maybe we do. I'm just saying we don't really know until we see what happens in the next few years.
I'm just saying, right? I didn't know that, so I appreciate that. Can I just get a insight into Democrat leadership's perspective? The seniority system within the Democratic Party, it's like it strikes me as antiquated, and it strikes me as leaving a lot of talent on the table. As a younger part of the leadership, and with Leader Jeffries now coming in and so forth, there's some transition. How is that working out? How is it strikes me that there's a restlessness kind of underneath within some of these committees where they're like, okay, time to step off the stage. How do you sort that out?
So it's a complicated answer. So first of all, I served in 4 years active duty U.S. military and the additional 21 years in the reserves. It is completely seniority based, right? You can be the most awesome first lieutenant. Doesn't really matter if someone's a major, right? You can listen to orders of major. So in the House Democratic Caucus, seniority is pretty powerful, but it is only a factor. And you saw, for example, on the House Judiciary Committee, the most senior person did not become ranking member. Jamie Raskin became ranking member. And you routinely have elections for these leadership positions and chairmanship positions from people in all different classes in the House Democratic Caucus. A lot of it is also relational. But it does turn out seniority is a factor members consider, but I do think we do see, sort of over the years I've been in, that it becomes somewhat less of a factor.
All right, we're coming up on a big vote this week, right? 1 a.m. I think's the time frame that they're thinking about voting. Thursday, 1 a.m. That's the time.
Charming, just delightful.
Yeah. Does it pass? Do they have enough votes?
So there was a Rules Committee meeting that started at 1 a.m. earlier today.
Yeah.
I believe it's still ongoing. So here's my analysis on whether the bill passes. Yes, no, maybe. That's where we are.
A real politician. A real politician.
So I'll tell you some of the points of the bill. It is the largest cut to healthcare in U.S. history, about $1 trillion. It will be the largest tax break to billionaires in U.S. history. And it's got a whole bunch of random provisions in there. For example, like a 10-year moratorium on AI on states. I'm not opposed to preemption. I am sort of opposed to preempting with nothing, right? Literally, there's nothing we're putting in its place. And 10 years is an awfully long time. If someone said, hey, look, give us a year for Congress to figure this out, that's something I could consider. But I think a 10-year moratorium is pretty extreme. I also don't understand how it's going to get through the Senate process, where it's got to be sort of related, essentially, to the budget. There is a dispute over the SALT cap, the state and local income tax deduction issue. And what's interesting to me about this is not only do you have different factions within the Republican conference that have very different views on this, but literally no Republican U.S. senator cares about this issue. And so whatever it is they lob over the Senate, I suspect is going to be changed. And I think, to me, actually, I think the hardest battle will be if the Senate lobs something back, what do House Republicans do with it? So I think that's actually
That'll be the hard one. That'll be the hard one.
monumental challenge.
Ted Lieu, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good seeing you.
Yeah, I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Peter, Heath, and Congressman Lieu. If you have any questions for Peter, his full contact information is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening to Baker Hosts and The Cloakroom with Peter Roskam. Comments heard on Baker Hosts are for informational purposes and should not be construed as legal advice regarding any specific facts or circumstances. Listeners should not act upon the information provided on Baker Hosts without first consulting with a lawyer directly. The opinions expressed on Baker Hosts are those of participants appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the firm. For more information about our practices and experience, please visit bakerlaw.com.